welcoming Harsh Kumar, who's with the advisory services of PwC, based out of Houston. And Harsh has spent the last 12 years working with businesses on some of their most challenging issues, especially around strategy development and implementation. To show how Harsh likes challenging cultural and environmental problems is, Harsh actually has an MBA from UT and a Master's of Industrial Science from Texas A&M. So you go figure that out. But in any case, we're thrilled to have Harsh here and give Harsh a round of applause.
Appreciate it. Well, good afternoon, folks. Just for the records, an Aggie is always an Aggie, so I did do my MBA from UT Austin, but at my core, I still am an Aggie grad. Good afternoon once again. I'm really excited to be here in front of you today. Thanks to Liquid Frameworks team to give me the opportunity to speak with you. The next 45 minutes, we're going to have some very interesting topics, and it's going to be very engaging, and I'll tell you how it's going to be engaging. But the three topics I want to speak with you today are: number one, we're going to talk about energy trends. We see a lot of news and articles on how the energy industry is doing in North America, what changes are happening in Middle East. But I'm going to give you some trends which are not only happening in North America, but also at a global level. These are encouraging trends, and I think it will give us a picture of what's going to come up in future. And I think that will be very interesting for you to look at. Number two, we'll talk about how companies have done in this environment of plunging oil prices. Just like in any market environment, you have companies which are on top, and there are companies which are on the bottom. The companies which are on the top, they have done something different. They have evolved in this kind of market, and as a result, they have the right to win. We call that right to win, or they deserve that success, and they're on the top of the charts because of what they have done in these kinds of market. And then other companies, a lot of companies have declared bankruptcies. A lot of companies are on the brink of declaring bankruptcy, and they're not doing so well. So the question in front of us becomes, what these companies have done that they have fared so fantastically in the market. And we're going to get into the depth of that, and we're going to reflect upon how we can learn some lessons from those frameworks. In that section, I'll also talk about some of the leading capabilities companies are investing in today. There are 4 or 5 things which we see are very hot in the market, and it will give you an understanding of what solutions and capabilities companies are investing in this sort of market. And lastly, our section number 3, our last topic of the day, would be digital transformation. Within digital, there's so much going on today. It's in everybody's mind. Everybody's talking about it. But we will first level set the field and define what digital means. And then we'll talk about some transformative solutions which companies are implementing from a digital point of view. Because there's so much which is in the market right now. I will try to give you a very crisp list of what solutions are providing the biggest bang for the buck for your investment in, again, this sort of market. So with that, let's get started. The first section, like I said, is the trends and the facts of the energy market. When you look at the global market, it has fundamentally changed over the last several years. When you look at this slide, it shows that for $1 consumed by a person, we are spending 2/3 of the energy compared to last 25 years. So it's a hallmark of the fact that we have become more efficient. We're using less energy per capita of income or of consumption. And this trend is even more acute when you look at it from a North America perspective. This one shows 33% drop over the last 25 years. When you look at North America, the energy consumption per GDP or per dollar consumed of GDP has dropped by 50%, which tells us that we have become much more efficient. We're using the right sources of fuel. Connected to that is this chart. As you see from the year 2000, as we look into the next 40 years from the year 2000, the consumption of liquids has dropped. It's dropped by 5% until now, and it's going to continue to drop on a global basis. The consumption of coal is dropping, as we all know in the United States, and it's going to continue to drop. But the interesting and exciting thing on this chart is how the renewable energy is doing. It's a very small percentage, a proportion of the pie, but when you look at it, it's almost doubling in the next 20 years. So if you are looking for investment, or if you're looking to invest your time or job prospects, that market is going to double in the next 20 to 30 years. And that's something which we should keep in mind as we grow in this energy market. All right, so let's turn our attention to what's happening in United States. You're all familiar with this chart. The prices plunged. In 2014, we came all the way down from $110 per barrel to less than $30 per barrel. And in order for a comparison to see, have we done this worse in past, we have to go all the way back to 1986. The plunge in the oil price is very similar to what happened in 1986. And as you can see, this maroon line, the way we came up was not as fast as we did back in those days. So this just tells us, we have gone through some really difficult times over the last 3 years. The market is improving, but even then, it is not as good as it was back in 1986. So it just gives you an indication of how bad it has been. Now, different markets within energy are performing differently. There are 3 big markets to look at. There is unconventionals, which is a shale, basins in North America. There is deep water or offshore, which is the number 1 on the right-hand side of the dotted line, and there's conventional. When you look at the offshore business, 2 years ago we predicted that this business is not going to come back for the next 5 to 10 years, and that prediction still remains the same. The offshore business, the deep water business is still going to be at the bottom of the barrel for a long time. So this tells us, especially when we look at the maroon column on that chart, negative 11% CAGR over the next 2 years, and in fact is going to be like that over the next 4 to 5 years. So if we are investing our time, our resources as a company in offshore environment, that is not the most prudent thing to do at this point of time. When we look at unconventionals, which is close to home, Texas, Oklahoma, our shale basins, that will see tremendous growth. We already saw tremendous growth over the last 2 years. Even when the prices plunged, the competition was given to us. We did really well. We cut our cost. We are still, a lot of companies are investing in Permian Basin, Eagle Ford Basin, and that's going to stay, and we're going to see a lot of growth continue in the unconventional business. So there are 2 aspects. There are almost 2 sides of the coin. Offshore is going to stay pretty dormant. Unconventional shale is going to continue to be a market to invest. Now, when we look at the conventional side of the business, the mature side of the business, it's neither as bad as the offshore business, nor it is as good as unconventional. So there is not much of a story there. With any social, political event, that number of negative 5% can go in either direction. So not a lot to talk about there. Now, following the same story, when you look at unconventionals, again, 2 years ago, we painted this picture that these basins in green, Permian, Eagle Ford, Scoop, and Utica, will do well. And that's what is happening today. We see a lot of growth in Permian and Eagle Ford. Companies like Apache have bought hundreds of acres of land in those basins, and those basins are going to continue to do better and better as we figure out how to reduce our cost even more and how to do more with less resources. When you look at the ones which are orange and red, those are mostly either sustained production in Marcellus and Bakken and Niabra, and stalled production in the ones in red. So I think as a group of people coming together and coming up with these charts, we have enough data to say to predict what's going to happen in future, and this just gives you an indication that these basins or which basins in the United States are going to be hot and which basins are going to stall. Okay, so let's talk about some trends in United States from a segment perspective. So we're going to talk about upstream, midstream, and downstream. As you can see, I mean, yes, the prices came down, but since January of 2016, we have gone up from less than $30 per barrel of oil to almost more than $50 per barrel of oil. So we have seen almost 70% increase in prices, and our prediction is that it's going to continue to increase if nothing bad happens, from a political or economic point of view. Is going to continue to increase in mid-60s over the next year. It's a very, very encouraging trend. It means there will be more jobs. Companies are going to continue to invest, and it's a trend which gives us hope. Now, when you look at the inventories, EIA predicts that the inventories are going to continue to drop after the January of this year. Some of that we have seen. It's a pretty slow-moving curve, but it's a good curve. It tells us that our supplies are going to continue to drop. Demand is going to remain stable or going to increase. And as a result, because of supply and demand factors, the prices are going to continue to increase. All right, so midstream, as you mostly know, that midstream was not impacted as much as the impact was on the upstream operators. The midstream performance tracks the price of oil, and they've fared a little bit better. Again, you can see the graph in maroon coming back up, and it's an encouraging trend in midstream. For midstream, one thing which we look at is the pipeline capacity, and over the last 15 years, since 2005, there is a projection of how many miles of pipelines will be built. And as you can see from the chart, after 2015, there is continued expansion in midstream in terms of building pipelines. Since 2010, the projection was around 200,000 miles of pipelines will be built. Again, that means more jobs, more growth in midstream sector, which continues to happen. On the right-hand side, we have the projection. Since 2010, projection was $100 billion will be spent on this industry, and that continues to happen as well, as you can see from the columns after 2017. And last but not the least, downstream is also recovering. For downstream, there are two big metrics which they look at. They look at their capacities and they look at their utilizations. When you look at this chart, it's telling us two things. One, the capacity is increasing almost by 10%, and same thing with the utilization of refineries. It's increasing by 10 to 15%. And same chart as in midstream, they track the oil price, but again, it's an increasing trend. So overall, the essence of this section, which I went through pretty quickly, was to talk about that, yes, we went through very difficult times, but looking forward is very positive. We are seeing a lot of encouraging trends in the business. Companies are hiring again. Companies are investing again. So it's all very positive trends for people like ourselves who either work in energy industry or who are connected with the energy industry. So with that, we're going to turn to section 2. To me, this is the most interesting section because it talks about capabilities. And in this sort of market, capabilities are extremely important for a company to have. Without capabilities, it's very difficult to prosper in the long run. Maybe you can cut costs quickly, and you can prosper in 1 to 2 years and show returns. But if you want to be a company which wants to be there for 50, 100 years, then you want to have very core capabilities that you can rely upon. So this framework, we use it in not just energy industry. We use it in pretty much every industry in any kind of market, and it talks about different levels of maturity. What we have seen after working with hundreds of companies, that in this type of market, when the prices are plunging or there is any kind of pressure, they go in this level of maturity. They start from level 1 mostly. Most of the companies will fall in level 1 and level 2 of maturity, and very few companies, maybe less than 5%, fall into the next 3 levels. We're going to talk in detail what level 3, 4, and 5 are, but I'm going to touch on level 1 and level 2 just a little bit. But before we even go into that, what this tells us is if you imagine, like, if you have a team of kids who are going to play soccer, and you are able to point in that team that this boy or this girl, they're going to score because they have the right to win. They have the right qualifications or right capabilities to make a score or to hit a home run or whatever. You are able to say that because of a reason. You're able to say that because you know that that boy or girl has some sort of capabilities, and because of that, that person will be successful. The same reflection applies to companies. You will meet hundreds of companies, or you will talk to hundreds of companies, but you know that very few companies will be successful in the long run, and you'll be able to say that because they have focused on the right capabilities. So that's the picture we're going to try to draw from this framework. So let's talk about level 1. Level 1 is basically senseless cost reduction, which happens, I've worked with 100 companies over the last 10 years. Out of those 100 companies, I can say at least 95 companies will do level 1, which is, imagine Friday evening, you get a call, or a VP of operations calls a plant manager and says that you need to get rid of 20% of your staff. I'm sure a lot of you have seen that in your careers. I hope you have not done it in your careers, but that happens all the time. Now the plant manager is, he has a gun to his head, and he has maybe a few hours or maybe a few days to abruptly cut people from his staff without doing any analysis, without putting any rigor behind that staff reduction. That's number 1. In level 1, that happens all the time. The other thing which happens in level 1 is all the Six Sigma black belts come out. They go to different plant locations. They do all of these Kaizens. And based on Kaizens, there are optimizations, there is waste reduction, there is variation reduction. All of that happens in a plant setting or a district setting or a regional setting. But very often, those improvements don't fall to the bottom line. And there are reasons behind that which we will not go into. Usually, it's because of lack of time and resources and money. But that's what happens in level 1. And most of the companies, I would say 60 to 70% companies fall into that level 1 of maturity. And while you're going through this, I want you to think about where your company falls, because we will have a live poll after this. But I'm going to request you to do a live poll. And you can see in this conference room where everybody lies from their company point of view. Now, level 2, we put a little bit more rigor. We put a little bit more analysis behind these reductions. We do from a headcount reduction perspective, we do something called spans and layers, which is looking into, for a given manager, how many direct reports do I have? If I have less than 8, I'm going to right-size the organization so that all the managers have 1:6 to 1:10 kind of ratio. So that gives you some analysis, some rigor behind further headcount reduction. You may get to, let's say, 10 to 20% headcount reduction as a result. We also see a lot of supplier cost negotiation, which is if you're an upstream operator and you have oilfield service coming in for drilling or cementing, you ask them for a discount, you may get like 5 to 15% discount, which translates into your materials or labor cost savings, which is good. And lastly, which I'm not a big fan of, and I also see this in a lot of companies, is the project deferral. If you are the VP of projects, or if you are the VP of capital expenditure, you're taking care of, let's say, 100 projects. What you do is you look into the projects which you like and you don't like, and you cut down the projects which you don't like, again, without a lot of analysis and rigor. And that, again, cuts too deep in the bone, and it takes away the capabilities unless you put some rigor behind the analysis and saw if that project is giving you any returns or not. That's the level 2, which in these level 2s, most of the companies fall. Let's move on to level 3. So what do we do in level 3? We look into the costs at a much granular level. Not just the P&L cost, not just the top 10 numbers. We're going to look at the level where we have at least 100 different accounts or 100 different cost classifications of your total cost. So if your company is a $1 billion company, you have a cost of $800 million, we're going to look into as granular information as possible for that $800 million. And we're going to classify that in these 4 categories. So number 1 are the costs which are not required. These are the costs which you can completely cut off. There is no need to spend money on that in difficult times. Number 2 is on the bottom left is the lights on. These are the costs which you need for health, safety, environmental, and legal needs. So these are things which you have to spend money on as a good company. And in that bucket, you shoot for the best-in-class cost levels. So you find out for like legal cost, what will be the theoretical best for the legal cost I should pay, in terms of cost per hour. Number 3 on the top right is the essential capabilities. This is what I was talking about. For every company, there are 3 to 5 differentiating capabilities. This is what you are famous for. This is what your identity is in the market. This is what makes you money. And this is what you are, competing in the market with, and it makes you successful. These 3 to 5 capabilities, that's where you want to invest in bad time. And that's very counterintuitive. A lot of companies don't think about it, but in bad times, it's the right time to invest. And it's the right time to invest in your differentiated capabilities. And all the other costs fall into the table stake box on the bottom right. That's everything else. So when you look at your cost picture in this way, it gives you a very easy, quick 4-box picture, and you're able to say that, okay, for my lights on and table stakes, that's best-in-class cost numbers. And when I say best-in-class, folks, that does not mean that you pull out some benchmarks and you try to make that as your guidepost. For me, the best-in-class is what is a theoretical best you can get for those particular costs. And your benchmarks will lie somewhere between the theoretical best and where you are at today. So best-in-class is really pushing it and getting to that lowest cost possible without touching the differentiated capabilities. Now, to give you an example of not required, I was thinking about it as I was preparing for it. 10 years ago, my first project, it was in Hawaii, and it was with a diagnostic lab. And this lab will collect blood samples from multiple locations on the island. And all these blood samples will come to the lab, and they'll test the samples, and the results will go out. Let's say there were 20 different locations from where the blood was collected or the blood samples was collected. All the locations were not big. Some of the locations were really small, and the person who was doing the rounds, he had a very specific route map, and he'll cover all the 20 locations before he comes back to the lab. When we looked at the data, when we were going through this margin improvement project, when we looked at the data, what we found was even when there were no blood samples on a particular location, the person still made a stop. And we were very curious, like, why did you make that stop? There was nothing to do over there. And he said, it is a mahalo stop. I'm like, what is mahalo stop? So in Hawaii, mahalo means hi. And this was just a goodwill stop because they had good relationship with the customer over there, and they wanted to make a stop just to say hi and have a coffee or tea and then go back to the next location on the map. That to me is a perfect example that in bad times, in difficult times, you don't have to make mahalo stops. You don't have to spend money in those type of cost categories. So that was level 3. Level 4 is what we discussed here on the top right box, the essential capabilities. We look into 2 things. Number 1, we look into what good assets that you have. So if you are an operator, and if you are in all kinds of basins, you may choose to just focus on Permian Basin based on what the market is telling you. And then you look into your top 3 to 5 capabilities that, okay, these are the capabilities which form our identity and help us win in the market. Let's write those down. And then look into where do we have gaps in those capabilities, and try to bridge those gaps by investing in those capabilities in bad times. So since I already covered this previously, I won't talk a lot about this one. Basically, in level 4, after you have looked into your cost structure, you have right-sized your company to that new cost structure. You look into these, let's say, 3 capabilities and a couple of assets, and you just focus on that as much as possible. So all of your energy, all of your resources are going into those capabilities and assets. Some companies, I'll give you an example of, if you think of IKEA as an example, they're famous for providing modular furniture in a very large store for a large demographics. That's what they're famous for. Starbucks, they just don't provide an expensive cup of coffee, but also the customer experience. That's what they're famous for. If you think from an energy perspective, Schlumberger or Baker, they're famous for their innovation. I mean, they are thinking of products which they can bring to the market that can be useful 3 to 5 years from now, not just this year. So that gives you a picture of what capabilities you should think about from your own company's perspective as you are investing in these capabilities. Just went through some of these examples. Yeah, Amazon and Google is a pretty good example too. They know their customers better than the customers know themselves. So sometimes we go on Amazon and we're buying something, and they'll tell us what else we want to buy before we even know. And that's the kind of strength you need to have in the capabilities. With that, the last level, this is where even the top companies fail. This is where people believe that this is a waste of time, and they fail to think about it. An operating model, that is just consultantese speak for people process technology. I mean, that's how most of the people think about operating model. But an operating model, however we think about it, should be something which helps your company enable your strategy. Whatever your strategy is, you should have the right operating model that enables the strategy for your company. An operating model, as I said, some people think of people process technology. We go a little bit deeper. We think of these 8 elements when we think of operating model. What kind of culture do you have? What capabilities do you have? How does your portfolio looks? Overall, not just singular projects. How do you fund that portfolio? How does your organization look, which is not just the lines and boxes in the organization, but also what kind of labor mix do you have? Governance, information flow, metrics, and motivators. This allows you to flex in good and bad times. So if the market is doing well, your operating model should allow you to grow. And if the market is doing bad, this operating model will allow you to shrink. So this should provide you the elasticity in the given market. All right, so we're going to end this section with a discussion on these 5 capabilities. As we have spent a lot of time over the last 2 years with 50, 60 companies, these are the 5 capabilities that we see energy companies focus on. Capital efficiency, which is if you have 100 projects, do you know the return on all of those 100 projects, and how do they stack to each other, and how can you continually make those projects better? That's basically number 1. Labor management, that's an interesting one. So if I have 100 people in my firm, in past, I would have 100 people on payroll. But today, I can have 50 people on my payroll. I can have 25 people as contractors in the United States, and I can have 25 people in best cost countries like India, Mexico, China, et cetera. And then when a downturn happens, I don't have to cut a person from my family. I can keep my 50 people. I can cut off the contractors or the people in best cost countries. That was not done, but we are seeing more and more companies using that labor mix to their advantage. Digital and technology, we're going to spend a lot of time on that in the next section. Value chain integration. So today, our segments are distributed. We have upstream, midstream, downstream. What we're going to see in future is full stream companies. So if you have a piece of land, you can give it to somebody or a company, and they will come in, they'll do the exploration, they'll do the drilling, cementing, pressure pumping, everything, and you'll get a royalty for the hydrocarbons found in that piece of land. So that's where the market is moving. A lot of vertical integration is coming up. And lastly, operational management. That is talking about supply chain management and asset management. a lot of parts and people don't show up on time, our assets fail in an unplanned fashion. All of that is going to go away, not just because we have digital in our arsenal, but because companies have gotten smarter and they're able to do better supply chain management, better asset management, because they know they have huge costs behind them. So those are the big 5 capabilities that if you are not focused in today, then you should definitely look into. All right, so let's switch gears and talk about the topic for the day. We only have 10 minutes left, but I think we live in very interesting times. Digital transformation is probably one of the biggest advancements in the 21st century. When I was researching for this, I looked back in the last 5 centuries and what big inventions and advancements were done. So 1600s was agriculture, 1700s was transfer from hands to machine, 1800s we invented the engine, and 1900s it was internet, a lot of medicinal advancements like penicillin, aspirin, X-rays, theory of relativity. All of those are scientific discoveries and advancements that we talk about today in 21st century. I think when we go to 22nd century, people are going to talk about that this is when, in these times which we live in, this is when machines started talking to other machines. And yes, that happened in past, but not at the level it is happening today, so cheap and so fast, and it's everywhere. I mean, we can go in and make our homes smart homes today if we want to, and that's easy for most of us. So I think we are living in the times which people will talk about. We are at that cusp of technological advancement which is going to change the game completely over the next 5 to 10 years. So everybody talks about digital, but I never found a good definition of digital ecosystem. To me, when I, again, scoured through hundreds of papers, this is what I see, or this is the simplest way of explaining it. There is hardware on the top left, software, services, or analytics, and rules. To retain it, in my mind, when you think about the hardware or tangible things, think of that as an analogy like a computer box. If you just have a computer with nothing on it, that's your hardware. Software, if you put a Windows operating system in it, that's now a little bit more useful, but still, most of us won't use a computer with just Windows operating system in it. However, when you start putting the right services, and I'm talking about like Microsoft Office, Adobe Photoshop, now you can do all kinds of calculations. You can write a paper. You can paint a picture. And that's when it becomes useful, and that's where I think a lot of benefit is as we move forward in this decade. And lastly, the rules are extremely important. We need to have the right protocols. We need to have the right cybersecurity so that we don't give our information into somebody who can use it for bad purposes. So to me, when I look into anything digital, this is the foundation, and now you can use this foundation for any kinds of benefits to your company. It's important because our leadership has already aligned with it. Most of the CEOs think that digital is going to change the way we do things. Our workforce is going to become younger and younger, and only 14% think that they're going to work in a 4-wall environment. And our operating models are going to become simpler and simpler because they're going to be enabled by technology. So we're going to see all these trends in the market. However, it's still very confusing today. We're not buying a lot of digital things because of 2 reasons. Number one, they don't provide you all of these 4 items. They just provide you 1 of these or 2 of these. So you don't get a complete solution, and that's what needs to change. Number 2, there's so many solutions out there, hundreds and thousands of solutions, that you don't know what's the biggest, what's the best investment for your company. So companies will need to do a better job in explaining to you that this is the best bang for the buck. And how will that happen? I think you're going to see a lot of alliances in the market. So you see in each of the 4 verticals, you have all these companies like SAP and Oracle and National Instrument and companies like myself, like PwC and Symantec. All of these companies will need to come together, not all of them, but a group of them, and provide you a complete solution and provide you an answer to what's the best investment for your money. All right, so last topic of the day, I prepared these 5 solutions which I've seen tried and tested in the market. There are already contracts which big companies are signing up for these solutions. If you have not taken the first step towards your digital transformation journey, these 5 places will be a good place to start at. So we won't have time to go into details of each one of them, but I'm going to skim through and provide you some fun facts. And we're going to end with a poll to see your interest in one of these solutions. And these solutions are applicable to most of the industry sectors. Does not matter which segment you work in. They should be applicable to most of you. So let's talk about drones. Fun fact, in the last 100 years, FAA registered 320,000 aircrafts. It took them 100 years to register 320,000 aircrafts. Imagine how long it took them to register 1 million drones. It took them 1 year. And it's not exactly a million, it's 820,000 drones. But that gives you an indication of how fast this industry is growing. In energy perspective, they're 85% cheaper, they're 85% faster, they're safer, and you'll see more and more companies going towards drones. A company called Eni, it's an Italian firm. They signed a 3-year contract with a firm, Sun Systems or something. And for 3 years, they're going to have all their inspection, analysis, and visualizations using drones. And that's going to be happening for a lot of different companies. The second one is connected assets or digital twins. This is a digital replica of your asset. And if you have the digital replica, you can combine the physical information, which is things like temperature, pressure, velocity, flows, metallurgy, with the digital information on the historical trends and information from similar assets to predict what will happen to that asset over its lifetime. Again, a big industry. GE is big in this. They have made 660,000 digital twins, saving up to $300 million. Next one is connected fields. So now we're talking from an asset to a basin. Think of Permian Basin, and if you were doing production in Permian Basin, now you have information on hundreds of wells. Today we use only 1% of all the information available to us. But in future, you can use all of that information to take intelligent decisions on where to drill, how to produce, get the data in automated fashion, and make the decisions in automated fashion. Fourth one is the connected workers. So it's not just wearing a smart glass or smart watch, but also using those smart systems. So if you're working on a machine, you should be able to see what are the standard operating procedures for this machine, what's the checklist for doing an inspection, doing any how-to videos. All of that could be done by a worker looking at his glass, and his performance can be in turn managed by his manager by seeing that, okay, out of the 10 people I have, these are the ones which need training, and these are the ones which are doing extremely good. So Schlumberger and Parsible signed a contract to do exactly that recently. And the last one, predictive maintenance. We do a lot of work in this. 86% of assets fail, not because of the way they were designed, but because they were under or over-maintained. And using technology, what we discussed in the connected assets, using technology, that will become much better. You will see less and less failures. This one is one of those solutions where you just don't, digital is not a requirement to do better in predictive maintenance. You can do that without digital, but with digital, it's going to get much easier, much faster in the coming time. All right, so folks, that's the end of the talk today. I appreciate you listening to me and providing us your time. I would end by saying that we discuss a lot of technology and a lot of digital, but that's not the end all and be all. For a lot of companies, the basics need to be clear, and the technology is step number 2. So please don't feel a rush to take that first step towards digital, because if you don't have the foundation clear, then digital will not help. So thanks for your time.